actually think there's a lot more people than I thought.
Well, you don't know how many are online. Or we'll
Well,
watch
there
it
could be
later.
a lot, there could be an awful lot.
Can they stream it later? Will it be posted as a video? Okay.
It's live streaming, and it will be on our website.
Maybe I should text my father the link.
Oh, yeah. Oh.
Good evening, and welcome to the Board of Estimate and Taxation Candidate Forum. My name is Kathleen Kramer. I'm a member of the League of Women Voters Minneapolis, but I'm not a resident of Minneapolis, and I'm pleased to be moderating this forum this evening. The League of Women Voters is a nonpartisan volunteer organization with a long history of providing unbiased candidate and issue information that's widely used by voters regardless of their political beliefs. This forum is sponsored by the League of Women Voters Minneapolis. The views expressed are those of the candidates and not those of the League. The League of Women Voters does not endorse or oppose candidates or political parties. This forum is being held in front of a live audience in the Minneapolis Central Library and is being live streamed to the League of Women Voters Minneapolis YouTube channel. We are holding this forum for voters to hear from the candidates and to compare their ideas. This is not a debate. Candidates are asked questions to which they will respond directly to the audience and not to each other, as would be in a debate. The candidates are aware of the format and have agreed to it. The recording of this forum will be available in its entirety after the forum and will have a closed caption option available in multiple language. Thank you to MCN6 for the production and recording of this event. We do ask that campaign buttons or campaign t-shirts are not worn in the room and no campaign signs or literature be distributed during this event. Please remain quiet as possible while the candidates are speaking so everyone can hear the discussion. We also ask that you hold your applause until the end of the forum so the candidates will have the maximum time to respond. And finally, let's all take a moment to silence our electronic devices. Okay. The Board of Estimate and Taxation, which I will shorten to BET for the rest of the forum, is defined by the city charter to hold public hearings to obtain citizen input relating to setting maximum tax levies for certain tax funds in the city, including the tax levies for the city, Minneapolis Park and Recreation Board, and Minneapolis Public Housing Authority. The board also authorizes the issuance and sale of municipal bonds. The board is comprised of the mayor, the city council president, the city council member who chairs the city council budget committee, a commissioner elected by and from the Park and Recreation Board, and 2 members elected by voters in a regular election held in each year, following year whose number is evenly divisible by 4. Okay. As a math teacher, I like that sentence there. That's a good one. Okay. All candidates on the ballot were invited to the forum, and we are pleased that they all are with us this evening. We thank the candidates in advance for engaging in a respectful and civil discourse. Let me introduce you to the candidates. We have Eric Harris Bernstein, Steve Brandt, and Bob Fine. We have timekeepers sitting in the front row, so each candidate has the same amount of time to respond to the questions. Following the opening statements of 1.5 minutes, each candidate will have up to 1.5 minutes to answer each question and 1 minute to make a closing statement. The timekeeper will hold up a card when there are 15 seconds remaining and a stop card when time is up. We ask that the candidates finish their sentence and stop at that point. We expect the forum to last approximately 1 hour. Now, the questions are based on community concerns and were developed by our committee and solicited from the community at large. During the forum, we will take written questions from the audience until about 6:40. A volunteer will gather the questions and hand them to our question facilitators and then to me, the moderator. We ask that the questions be clear, pertinent to the issues at hand, within the scope of the office, and made in the form of a question, not a statement. All questions are carefully reviewed and rewritten when necessary to make sure that they are directed to all candidates, are forward-looking, and not biased and not of a personal nature. We look for a balance of topics that affect all of us, both locally and in the city. To get as many topics as possible, we will limit the number of questions in each category, and we may have to consolidate questions of the same general topic. If you feel your questions were not addressed, please follow up with the candidates after the forum. Finally, all submitted questions are the property of the League of Women Voters, Minneapolis. Okay, now, for the candidate's opening statement, we ask that they address the question, why are you running, and what are your qualifications? Each candidate will have 1.5 minutes to respond. It was determined by jury numbers that the first candidate to speak is Stephen Brandt, followed by Eric Bernstein, and then Bob Fine. And then the order for answering questions will just randomly rotate as we proceed through the next hour. Okay. So, candidate Brandt, why are you running, and what are your qualifications?
Thank you for the opportunity. First, let me say that if you know my name, it's probably because you were a reader of the Star Tribune, which was where I worked for 40 years, and that was where I spent time doing my own research, doing my own analysis, and then presenting my conclusions in writing as a reporter, as a journalist. And I was urged to run in 2021 by the two incumbents who were stepping down from the board at that time because they knew I had a strong background in city finances and also in county, metro, and state finances. I am running for re-election. I'm the incumbent in the race, and I'm doing so because I have worked hard to make the board more accessible to the public by adopting a webcast and giving the public an opportunity to testify on agenda items at each meeting. We've strengthened the board as an independent entity by restoring the executive secretary position, which had gone dark under previous boards, and that person will help us do independent research and restore the board's institutional memory. We're balancing the needs of the city and those who are paying the bill and having difficulty, and because of that I've pushed hard to explore alternative resources, which is something that I hope we will talk about later.
Candidate Bernstein.
Hi, thanks for having me. I'm Eric Harris Bernstein. Why am I running? First and foremost, I believe in the value of collective public investment and our collective resources. Things like parks, public safety, infrastructure. I think those are the things that make Minneapolis or any city a great place to live. And I've been doing that sort of work, fiscal policy work, from a progressive pro-public lens for over 10 years now, and for just about 5 years, a little over 5 years here in Minnesota. I think that those things, those collective resources, are extremely important, but that our conversation around how we fund them is often toxic. Taxes are a political third rail, and I think that leads us to all manner of poor decision making. So my interest in running for the board is to help ensure that we have the resources we need to fund collective investments that our city is suffering without, but also to help create a more constructive conversation about the value we get for our tax dollars and the importance of those dollars, both the benefits and the costs. And why am I qualified? I've been a fiscal policy wonk for over 10 years, starting at a think tank back east, then in grad school in California, and then here at the state level doing tax and budget work for the last 5 years with a bunch of different labor unions and grassroots organizations. Thanks.
Candidate Fine.
Thank you. This is a pleasure to be here with the League of Women Voters, and I'm here to introduce myself, but I've been around for a while. People in my neighborhood know of me as a coach, which I've been doing, coaching kids for 50 years. But a lot of people know because I was on the park board for 16 years. And so I served 4 terms on the park board to understand city government. So why am I running? It's to advance accountability and promote responsible budgeting, considering the tough financial times that we're facing with property tax revenue being at risk, especially downtown. Some of my other qualifications are, frankly, I served on this board for 16 years. I was the park board representative, so I really understand it and went through both tough and better times on it. And during that time, I learned a lot about how city government works, and so that has a lot to do with why I'm running. I sort of see the difficult times we're facing, and I think I can be instrumental in trying to promote and try and get things done positively. I'm also very active in a lot of other respects. I'm currently on the Civil Rights Commission. I'm the longest serving member for 23 years. I've been on the zoning board. I'm an attorney. I have a degree in mathematics, which helps my background in finance. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Okay, we'll move into the questions period now, and candidates, again, will have 1.5 minutes to answer. The order for answering the first question is as follows: Candidate Bernstein, followed by Candidate Fine, and then Candidate Brandt. Okay. Oh, question. All right, question 1. How would you summarize the role of the BET and your role as board member? Why is the BET important to the city's fiscal health?
It's a great question. So formally, the board has a fairly limited role to approve the maximum property tax levy for the city and the park board and to approve city bonding questions. And so I think that's important in and of itself, to just make sure that we're approving a levy that is sustainable for taxpayers, but also sufficient to fund our public investment needs, that we're not making irresponsible bonding decisions. But I think all of us tonight at some point will talk about the informal role of the BET and the role of a BET board member as a spokesperson for the city's budget, its needs, its challenges. And I think that's an extremely important and valuable office, or at least it could be if used properly. Like I said, I think taxes get treated as a third rail, and I think that this sort of nonpartisan intergovernmental body could be a great place to have a more productive conversation about our tax rates and where the dollars are going and how we could use better fiscal strategy to get better outcomes. I guess I'm going to cede the rest of my time because I felt like that was pretty cogent.
Okay, that's good. Thank you. Candidate Fine?
Thank you. One thing sort of interesting about this board is that most people, I think I'm having a problem with the sound, most people have no clue to what this board actually does, and it's actually very powerful. I mean, the fact that it sets the maximum tax rate controls a lot of what the city council and mayor are going to do financially, as well as the park board, and used to be the library board when I was on it earlier. So in addition, we do the bond financing for the city, which used to be, when I first got on back in the late 90s, was $1 billion, and we were doing probably about 50 million in new financing. So it's actually a very important finance board that has a lot to do with the way the city's operating. Where do we go from there? I tend to look at it that I'm looking for budgetary reasons, how we change the way we're operating. And it means that the city and the park board need to work with this board in advance and decide, here's what we're planning and here's what we're going to do. And it's real important to make sure we understand, considering what's out there, how we work together. And that's where we come into it. I don't think any of us disagree on any of these fundamentals we've given. Thank you.
Thank you. Candidate Brand?
One reason it's important to have a Board of Estimate and Taxation is that the voter is elected by a 2-to-1 margin when given the chance to eliminate it, to keep it. So they saw value in it. It serves an important function as a mediator between the city enterprise and the park board. And the reason that's important is mayors have had a tendency, and I'm sure Bob can recall some examples, of shortchanging the park board when they make their budget recommendations. The city gets less than half of its general fund from the property tax. The park board gets more than 80% of its general fund from the property tax, and so it's much more property tax dependent, and it affects their ability to do the mission if the mayor shortchanges them. It also gives voters a voice in city decisions on indebtedness and on the property tax increase. And the reason that there were two people chosen historically to be elected to the board is that the legislature revamped the Board of Estimate in the 19-teens because the city council was perceived by the Hennepin County legislative delegation as not doing a very good job of putting together a city budget. And they felt they needed an outside entity to give more concentrated attention to the budget, and so we resulted with the BET, and it was adopted into the city charter in 1920.
Okay. Thank you. Question 2. What are the biggest challenges you see to the current fiscal health of the city? What steps would you take if elected to address them? And Candidate Fine, you go first.
Okay. When we talk about current challenges, we're talking about the difficulty that we're facing as residents of the city with what's going to happen with the city budget and how it's going to affect all the homeowners, because it really does affect sincerely the homeowners in the city. And so I think it's really important that we look at it from a number of factors, which is how best to come up with ideas that the city can save money and can operate differently, and also to sort of audit the city as to how they're doing and what they're doing. And I think that the responsibility of this agency is to watch over these functions and to get to the point on what is really important and what needs to be done. Considering we've got challenges, we have to take a look at everything in the budget, and I have a long background in doing that, and that happens to be a big reason why I decided to run again, or to get on this board again, because a lot of people consider it sort of the boring board, but to me, I consider it a very important function of the city.
Thank you. Candidate Brand?
One challenge is that we're still dealing with the pandemic in terms of the budgetary hangover. We had a tough period there. Fortunately, the federal assistance helped us through, but because the state has been dealing with the same issues, we have not seen the local government aid growth from state revenues that we should see, considering particularly the amount of money that Minneapolis sends to the state. I believe the last figure I saw was that we send $1 for every, and get back 65 cents for every dollar. Another issue, and local government aid has been virtually flat for the last 8 years. Another issue is the lack of progressivity in our property tax system. At best, it's revenue neutral. At worst, it's slightly regressive. And I think we need to address that by searching out non-property tax revenues that we can look at supplementing the budget with so that we can have budgetary growth. But citizens tell me that they also want a serious look at the factors that have influenced budgetary growth over the last 10 years, and they want to be sure that their money is being well spent. And I have supported, even though the Board of Estimate doesn't have the power to actually start a study commission, we have to ask the City Council for that permission, that we do that.
Thank you.
Guess that leaves me.
That leaves you.
Okay. So I'm going to talk about the main challenge that gets spoken about in the media most, and which I think we usually spend most time on, and that's the falling property values downtown. The way a levy works, when property values downtown fall, they go up on the other places where the value remains. And so that's what's happening now. We get a 6.8% levy increase, but your property tax burden will likely go up because you not only have a larger levy, but a larger share of that levy. So the answer to that is sustainable growth in the tax base. And I guess maybe one thing that would differentiate my perspective on this is that I actually think the city needs to consider what proactive investments we can make to attract and sustain more tax base rather than, I mean, I don't disagree with Bob's point about looking for savings and improving our spending strategies, but I do think that we need to make sure what housing can we build, what sort of amenities can we build that will attract people and keep them living here and make Minneapolis a destination for people regionally and across the country. But then I want to give a little airtime to another longer term challenge that I'm concerned about, which is our demographic changes. We're getting older as a country. All developed nations are getting older. That requires it's a higher burden of service on any government, any regional or local government, and it also means less revenue coming in because of less working age people. And so that's going to require even larger picture solutions of all cities across the country. And I think thinking about that, I'll just preview a future answer hopefully, but we need to think more about less just about public income and more about public wealth.
Okay, thank you. Okay, next question. What financial expertise and experience should elected members have to be effective members of the BET? And what other skill sets would be helpful to fulfill the responsibilities of the BET? And Candidate Brand, could you please go first?
Certainly. I think the ability to find one's way around a budget is helpful. I've been doing that for 40 years. I've learned to ask a lot of questions, and I've asked hundreds of questions of the city budget staff even before I was on the board, just trying to understand the city budget. When I started covering City Hall, I spent a weekend reading the city's 500-page budget, and it's that sort of wonkiness that contributes. Mm-hmm. Also, I think you need to have a good sense of what people in Minneapolis feel about the value that they're getting for the property tax they pay and the budget that the city adopts. And I think that is a matter of keeping in touch, and that's why we've expanded the opportunities for the public to comment before us. One example is, for example, we had a groundswell of support for a expanded public housing levy, which the board adopted after we received more testimony than we've had on any other issue, and that helped us to do some renovation of public housing units that wasn't being funded by the federal government because the feds have sort of walked away from that responsibility. And so and also to add some units in selected places around the city. But I'm a believer in taking care of what you have before you add new.
Thank you. Candidate Bernstein?
Could I get it one more time? It's a good.
Absolutely. What financial expertise and experience should elected members have to be effective members of the BET? And what other skill sets would be helpful to fulfill the responsibilities of the BET?
Well, I certainly think literacy and, a range of public policy and fiscal policy issues is important. I agree with Steve on that. I guess I would emphasize, I think the BET requires sort of a bigger picture framework. If we, I think, analyze our budgets based on kind of the status quo, you can make some amount of progress, but I think it's helpful to have a broader sense of the future of the city and the needs there. And so I guess I would advocate for, I don't want to say more political, but more socioeconomic analysis of the city's positions, because I think if we look too narrowly at every one line item, I think we'll walk ourselves into potentially some dead ends. And then what other skills? I think public communication would be a valuable skill, coalition building a very important skill, because ultimately in politics what you can get done is done through relationships. And so that's something I have. I guess I'll say that I think I have experience building political relationships, and I think that's very important, working with, park board, city council, mayor, and hopefully the electeds, whichever two of us it becomes, are people that can make those groups work collaboratively together.
Thank you. Candidate Fine?
Yes, thank you. I think I probably answered, I don't want to repeat, but I think an important function of this board is understanding the finance area. And I've always been one who've worked heavily in finance, and I've got my degrees in mathematics from the University of Minnesota. And I've been on this board for 16 years and spent a lot of time going over budgets and looking at a lot of things and where we should go. But it's also sort of understanding, as Eric said, how government works and where it goes from there. I mean, we need to probably press the state legislature to get back to local government aid, which we had in the past. When I first got on this board, I think it was about 123 million was the amount we were getting in local government aid from the state. That still doesn't come to how Minneapolis pays a lot more into the state than they get in return. And we should get back to that. We're actually at a point where I think it's somewhere about 81 million we're getting from the state right now. So in 25, 30 years, we've gone down in the number of the amounts we get from the state. It's important for people on this board to be able to work with state legislators and try and change that and get back to where we were. That'll help some of the financial issues. That's it. Thanks.
Thank you. Okay, question 4. What have you learned as a result of the pandemic, civil unrest, and the continuing economic fallout that would be important to your work on the BET? And Candidate Bernstein, can you go first, please?
Do I have to?
Yes.
Sorry. Okay, that's a huge question. What have I learned from COVID and George Floyd, fallout from George Floyd, and yeah, okay. Well, I think that governments, and especially local governments we've seen, have an enormous role to play in forming social trust or failing to form social trust, and the impact that that can have on a city's economics and its sort of social environment. I think Minneapolis has continued to struggle along, maybe slowly recovering since those traumatic incidents, and I think that to me, it speaks to the need for a more effective local government that people feel served by. I'm not going to, get into public safety policy, but, public dissatisfaction with MPD, for example, creating a lot of social distrust. I see that on the doors when I talk to voters. People, there's been stories of fraud in Minnesota, and that erodes people's trust in government. And I think that these corrosive incidents that we've had over the last 5-6 years have only, to me, heightened the need for an effective government that people feel ties them together and that will care for them in difficult moments. Yeah, so that's a big question, but that's the best I can do.
Thank you. Candidate Brand?
Well, like many of you, I've learned a lot from the pandemic and from civil unrest. Things that don't apply necessarily to the work here. How long to wash my hands, for example. And I've also learned a lot about, along with a lot of other people, we've studied the conditions that we all sort of knew that were under the surface, but are bubble up after an event like that. But in terms of the job, I would say I learned about the fragility of the city's finances when it comes to the sales tax and the special taxes from lodging and various forms of entertainment, and how a fall off in that really affects the general fund, which went from about 30 million to I think 11 million coming from those tax sources during the pandemic. I also learned how reinforced to me, I knew this to some degree as a reporter, but how important the downtown tax base is to our taxes in the neighborhoods. And at the start of the pandemic, I believe the downtown the residential share of property taxes was at 47%, and the rest was apartments and commercial, and it's projected to be in the high 50s by 2031 under the current budget plan, which is frightening, and I think that's why we have to find a better source for city revenues.
Thank you. Candidate Fine?
Yes, thank you. It's sort of a difficult question to answer for the Board of Estimate and Taxation about what's been happening to the public, because, for instance, I've been on the Civil Rights Commission the last 5 years, and that is where a lot of these issues have come up, not so much with the Board of Estimate. So what is the Board of Estimate actually looking at? I would think that they're looking at being sensitive to what's been happening out there and trying to figure out where do we go from here. We've got a long way to go, but the Board of Estimate is not legislators, so they're not going to be able to do a lot of things, but they can help try and influence the direction, because a lot of people want there to be effective government. They want to know that government is listening to them and that they're trying to do something about it, and I think that's the most important thing, that the Board of Estimate sort of be there for the general population, even though, frankly, most of the people couldn't tell you what the Board of Estimate is, unfortunately.
Thank you. Okay. In what ways can citizens stay informed about and participate in the work of the BET? And how does the board incorporate citizen input into its decisions? And Candidate Brandt, please go first.
One way you can stay informed is to watch our webcast, and read our agendas before the meeting, which is what we do. I think it's also, and I can tell you they're a great cure for insomnia, both of them. Another thing you can do is come down and testify on it. You can testify on any item that's before the board. Dive deeper on city finances. There's a wealth of information. The city has a fairly transparent budget. I'd like to see our budgeting go a little deeper than it has traditionally. Some people argue for zero-based budgeting. Everything I've read has suggested that that's a little bit too time-intensive to implement on a practical basis, but I think we should look at program-based budgeting to make sure that each program that the city funds and operates is doing what it was set up to do, is still relevant, and I'd like to see people get engaged in that sort of debate. We have tried to set up a citizen group to look at city's budgetary growth, but we've been told by the city attorney that we have to go through the city council if we want to do that, and that conversation is just beginning.
Okay, thank you. Candidate Fine?
Yeah, as you just heard, this is not an easy answer. How do you get citizens to be informed about what's going on? It's hard to get them interested. It's really difficult. I mean, I'm not saying the newspaper can do a better job at it, but they probably could. But it's difficult to get people interested because they tend to shy away from these issues. When I went to school, I was heavily into science. All my brothers were too, and that isn't where everybody went. You know, it was sort of like people shy away from those things. So I think the important thing is probably to try and seek publicity as best as they can to get people informed so that they'll contact Board of Estimate members and maybe show up at the public hearings that we have. I mean, I know from my history of the 16 years, it was rare to ever see anybody show up at a Board of Estimate meeting. And you sort of look at it with being, gee, this is really unfortunate. People should really understand what's going on because they can have a major impact on what's going on. And it's partially done because of the membership. You have the president of the park board usually, and you have the mayor and 2 council members on there. And so it should get publicized more. Thanks.
Thank you.
So I think the question is being kind of interpreted as what can we do to encourage engagement with the Board of Estimate and Taxation and the policy decisions being made there. One thought is maybe electing someone on the slightly younger side as one of the two representatives would help with some engagement on social media. That's a possibility. I would say, I think Steve's done incredible work on this, getting live streaming and working on that part, and I think continuing that's important. But I also think, it's lack of engagement with the BET is probably a symptom more so of our broader social context. And I think that that's a question that all city leaders should look inwardly and think about. What services is the city providing, not providing, or could provide better that would make people feel more engaged with their surroundings? I mean, we do have great parks, but I think we should not stop innovating in those public amenities. People talk about the need for public third spaces that are not just outdoor parks, but indoor spaces as well for folks to gather, especially in the colder months. I think Minneapolis shouldn't give up on some of its founding promise as a place that increases the quality of life through collective investment, and the board does have a role in creating the sustainable funding for those sorts of things.
Thank you. Okay. Now, what possible alternatives should the city consider to raise revenue instead of increasing property taxes? And Candidate Fine, you go first.
Some of the alternatives to raise revenues are, things like going over the budget and finding different ways we can save. One of my suggestions has been, and it's just one of probably a number of them, and I'd probably get into it more, is to take a look at what departments can we shift to some other part of the government, or where can we save. One of the ideas is that the appraisal department of the city, maybe it's not necessary that the city has that. The county could probably do that. That's what happens in Ramsey and St. Paul. The county actually does that. That's a $13 million department. That could be an awful big savings. The one thing I'm looking for is not to find new ideas of revenue. It's been proposed that we could have a city income tax. I think that's not a very good idea. I think that that's not the direction we should be headed in, because there's all sorts of repercussions, including the fact our more wealthy citizens are going to choose to either move out of the city if they live here, or they're not going to move in. And that's not really sort of a good solution. But maybe to find things where we can save and we can, closely examine what should we be doing, what should we not be doing. And besides that, a city income tax wouldn't fit the bill for the next couple of years. It would take a long time to get that changed.
Thank you. Candidate Bernstein?
So I get to be, I guess, sort of a moderate candidate on this question, which I enjoy. I think there are good ideas and questions to explore about alternative revenue sources. The income tax is one that's getting talked about. There's an expansion of the special taxing district, which doesn't cover North Loop. There's also things we can lobby for at the state level, like more LGA or more freedom to use our fee revenue in different ways. I support the exploration of those things. I'm skeptical on the income tax one for similar but maybe differently phrased reasons as what Bob said. The thing that I'll talk about, because I don't think it'll come up from any other answers, is the need for income-generating public assets. This is what I was referring to when I said public wealth, not just public income. In other countries, and even in some other counties in the U.S., local governments are starting to build and own not just affordable housing, which loses money, but market housing, which can earn money and cross-subsidize other housing investments and other sorts of investments. And that mindset of how can we take city assets, which we own hundreds of millions and billions of dollars of publicly owned assets, and make sure that we are not spending more than we need to maintain them, and that in some cases we're actually generating income from them. I think that is an important strategy for our long-term needs. And I'll just go over a second of our time to say that Bob's done some interesting things like that in his career, and we had coffee a couple weeks ago, and I really enjoyed learning from him about some of those decisions that he helped make.
Candidate Bryant?
Several ideas. One is a voluntary payment in lieu of taxes program for nonprofits, such as Boston has implemented. We could raise roughly in the vicinity of 40 million on that. A land transfer tax, the state already has one, the county has one, a modest one as well. Based on the experience of other places, 32 million. San Francisco has an empty houses tax if you're not occupying your house. We could expand the downtown liquor restaurant taxing area, as Eric mentioned. I'd like to see us return to a more progressive property tax system, which we used to have. So as the value of your home rose, the percentage you paid in property tax rose. I'd also like to address the tax on high earners, which I've suggested be looked at. I think we need to look at the feasibility of an income tax on high earners only before we throw it out. Show me that it's driving people out in other cities where it's been implemented, like New York and Philadelphia. And tell me that the high property tax here isn't already driving people out. I don't think the houses around the Lake of the Isles are going to go empty if there's a high earner income tax.
Thank you. Now we have a question from the audience. Right. As I said, this is a question from the audience. Property tax is a wealth tax that disproportionately taxes the assets of the middle class. What is your point of view on taxing other assets, such as equities owned by city residents, as a way to raise revenues? And Candidate Bernstein?
I appreciate the reminder embedded in this question that property taxes are a form of wealth tax, although obviously not the most progressive. That is one reason that I think they do have a role to play in funding government, and I've sort of been a defender of the value of a property tax as a small percent of the total tax that most people are paying once you count federal, state, and local taxes. The question about the asset tax, I completely support that idea, and I think that I am very troubled by the stratification of wealth in our country. That's one of the motivating factors for my entire career. I don't think that a local government would be the right place to implement that idea realistically. I think maybe, we could weather an income tax at a small rate on high earners. I think that would be a reasonable thing to explore. But an asset tax like that, unfortunately, I think would certainly create large distortions in our local property base. And I would, I guess maybe politically I could get behind that as like a sort of slogan, but I don't think that that would be right in practice for a city like Minneapolis. Maybe New York could get away with it. That's all I got.
Okay, thank you. Candidate Fine?
Thank you. I'm not sure how to answer this other than to sort of copy what Eric has said on that. And I think that, I agree, I think an asset tax would be too difficult to implement. It would be too hard to get through. And we have to understand this. We're not dealing with a situation where the Board of Estimate can actually do anything. All they can do is be lobbyists to go to the state to ask for permission to do some of these things. And that's a long ways off. Even if it was proposed, let's say, next year in 2026, it's not going to be something that's going to pass through the legislature immediately. It would take years before it would get in. By the time we do it, hopefully downtown will have changed, and the revenue will change substantially with the city. So it's like, what are we trying to do and how are we trying to do it? It's very difficult to sort of make those kind of changes, and I find that's what I find would be difficult with both an income tax and an asset tax.
Okay. Thank you. Candidate Brandt?
I think this issue of downtown property tax and its trough is going to be a 5 to 7 year issue. I don't see us coming back quickly. So I agree that it will take several years for the city to sell the state on any of these particular new sources of revenue. If we have the kind of Trump bounce back at the legislature and get big DFL majorities, I think our odds increase. I agree with Eric that a wealth tax at the local level doesn't make sense because you have to set up a new bureaucracy to essentially administer it. I think it makes more sense perhaps at the state level as somebody who would probably be hit by it. And I think an income tax is much simpler because all you need to do is add a line to your state income tax form that says essentially if you live in Minneapolis and your income, your adjusted gross income is over X, pay X percent, 1% perhaps. And just 1% would yield 40 million. So that's my stand on taxing those forms of wealth.
Okay, thank you. Okay. What is your approach to constructively using different points of view to make policy for the city? And could you please provide an example? And Candidate Fine, could you answer this first, please?
I'm not sure if I can answer that. I think we need more of a description of what are we talking about from different, what is the point of view? I think it's really important that elected officials listen to many points of view. So I think it's really important to be open-minded and to be able to understand what somebody is trying to present and how, do they think it'll actually help us get something resolved. I'm big on trying to make changes and do something that's a little bit different. That was what Eric had brought up about some of the things I did when I was on the park board. I was frequently president or vice president of the park board, and I was presenting programs where we could actually save money. Some of it had to do with the concessions that are over at the lakes, at Lake Calhoun and at Nokomis and over at Minnehaha Falls, where we actually got substantial revenue, where in many cases the park board was losing money, and then later on we were getting $250,000, which is a way of raising money. Frankly, some of these ideas came from other people, and I think it's really important to explore and see if they work and whether we go ahead with them. That's all. Thanks.
Thank you. Candidate Brandt?
I think a good example of using different points of view to achieve public policy comes in the hiring of an executive secretary for the Board of Estimate, who's really the hub of the board, prepares our agendas, does financial analysis, and so on. The board was formed about 105 years ago, and it, in that time, has had only 4 executive secretaries. The last one served for 38 years. When he retired, the board at that time decided not to replace him. As a full-time person, they hired a couple people, different people, half-time. That turned out not to be very workable because people wanted, believe it or not, a full-time wage, and they also wanted benefits, and half-time didn't provide that, so those people left fairly quickly. I pushed for making the position full-time. The mayor opposed that after a few deadlocked votes caused by the fact that we don't have a 7th tie-breaking member on the board. I tried to do a half-time, the mayor proposed that we do a consultant. We did a consultant for about a year, and that was not very cost-effective. The board's composition changed somewhat as the city council composition changed, and I was able to get through an executive secretary who started work in July, and we're now getting our own research needs met, and that helps our capacity.
Thank you. Candidate Bernstein?
Could you, what role, excuse me?
Let me just reset it again, okay? What is your approach to constructively using different points of view to make policy for the city? And give us an example.
I think my approach is to focus on desired results, the goals that we're pursuing. I've done that in my work at the state level. In that framework, the goal is a sustainable budget capable of funding our collective investment needs. And so I've had a fair amount of success in building relationships with more conservative Democrats or Democrats that are more conservative than me, and even some Republicans around the idea of effective fiscal policy, fiscal responsibility. Because the truth is, if you have a genuine interest in functional government, then you have a high interest in effective government. Even if that comes at the price of admitting when people associated with you are on your side, or when the policies you've advocated for in the past have had less than optimal results. And so I think being open, being honest, and being clear on your values and the goals that you're pursuing helps create opportunities to work with people with varying, maybe perspectives. And I think a nice thing about this race, and one of the reasons I've enjoyed running and getting to know Bob and Steve, is that, there is a sort of like almost objective logic to fiscal policy. So whether we agree on every investment that the city should or shouldn't make, there is a pretty standard logic of, what is a good use of, or a good way of raising and spending dollars or a poor one. And I think that helps mend fences sometimes.
Thank you.
Or maybe tear down fences, so.
Okay. The BET has 6 members: the mayor, the city council president, 1 additional city council member, a park board commissioner, and 2 elected members. How much real influence do the 2 elected BET members have? And Candidate Brandt?
I would say that we have had quite a bit of influence on the board since I started. In the beginning, it was dominated by a block aligned with the mayor. The 2 council members were aligned with the mayor. That switched after the 23 election. I've always gotten along well with the park board representative and tried to generally help their interests. I have been able, for example, to advance the conversation as a public member on the looking for alternative revenue. I said a year ago that I would not vote for this year's budget unless I had a firm commitment from the mayor and the council president that they would explore alternative revenues, and they agreed, and we've gotten the results now, and we're going to continue the discussion. And I think that's an example of real influence. And we're going to try and do the same thing in looking at the city's budgetary growth, just so we can analyze where we've come from and where we're headed.
Thank you. Candidate Bernstein?
So I think the amount of influence depends on the person and how they use the office. I think, as Steve said, he's been very effective in moving conversations that he feels are important, and I think I agree with him, and I think he's done great work there. I think it depends on who it is and their relationships they're able to form, and of course also the political environment. Who's the mayor? Who are the park board members? And what constraints or opportunities are the city facing? I think I would strive to use the role constructively to find out where there were issues of potential consensus, where the city could improve its fiscal position. I think probably there's a number of thoughtful critiques I would want to bring about not just how Minneapolis spends its dollars, but how governments have become accustomed to spending the dollars. And I think that starting those conversations in an open and collaborative way would be a good way to garner influence for a positive end.
Okay. Candidate Fine?
Yes, thank you. Interesting question, because it's always been on my mind. When I served on the board before, there were 7 members, including the library board member. To get things done, you still needed 4 people on your side, meaning that the 2 council members and the mayor can't do things on their own. That hasn't changed with the library board disappearing and there being no library board member. Frankly, I found that the elected members have an awful lot to do with how it gets along, and getting along is really what it is. Working with the other people that you're on the board, it's really important that you do that, and that's how you get things done, and you get things done right. I always got accused by the council and the mayor during my 16 years that I controlled the board. All I did was able to convince the 2 people elected directly and the library board candidate, this is the way to go. And frequently I was able to get even council members to come along. But I think it's just a matter of how you work with them. I've got this long background. I was president many times for the park board. I was president of the Board of Estimate, when they usually, as a matter of course, they usually only elected from the 2 independently elected people. But I found that we can work together and get things done, and by the end, my 16 years, I had the previous mayor who thought I controlled the board actually asking for me to be president of the Board of Estimate. And that was because how we all got along.
Thank you. Okay, we have time for one last question before your closing statements. The year is 2040. How do you envision the financial health of Minneapolis? And Candidate Bernstein?
The year is 2040.
2040.
Minneapolis is in excellent fiscal shape thanks to the leadership of folks like us that helped steward forward a groundbreaking public urban wealth fund that funded new housing, environmental investments, new parks, new forms of public space that attracted more residents, sort of reshaped the urban area for productive formation of communities, and we've innovated new forms of public cohesion based on our strong fiscal planning. I've never had to do that before. Yeah, I think we could be in good shape if we try and if we're open to considering both the value as well as the cost of our public investments and exploring new opportunities and new ideas.
Okay, Candidate Brandt?
I envision in 2040 a robust downtown, a downtown that's fully recovered, that has found the right mix between commerce and residential and retail, and one that invests in its neighborhoods in the way that it did during the neighborhood revitalization program period, and one that gives people who have little hope of more. Hope in the area of health, hope in the area of education, hope in the area of housing. And if that happens, I can die happy.
Thank you. Candidate Fine?
Like Steve, we were probably both hoping we're not going to die soon. Being the older members, we both hope to be here in 2040, and I'd actually look at it as it's not too far off anymore, but I look at it that we want to see both the financial health and the population of the city of Minneapolis, meaning its citizens, are in great shape, and that we're the kind of community that people want to live in Minnesota. We may get 10 below and 20 below weather in the winter, but there's a reason we all live here, and there's millions of people in this area. And it's because we offer the best city to live. Not just the park system. We have the best park system, an urban park system in America. But we should have the best city that people want to live in because the elected officials listen to the population. They do what they think they want, and we have a robust city, and things work well together. And I'm just this person in Minneapolis has always been that way. I live on the block I grew up on since I was born, so I haven't gotten very far. Minneapolis is a great city, and I think we can keep it that way.
Thank you. Well, now it's time for our closing statements, and you'll have up to 1 minute for your closing statements, and the order will be Candidate Fine, Candidate Brandt, and Candidate Bernstein. So, Candidate Fine.
Well, I don't know what more to say. What I think about is that I'm running for the Board of Estimate because I was on the Board of Estimate. As far as anybody alive, I've served as long as anybody on the Board of Estimate. And I think that I can bring a lot to this office to try and improve the city and try and get us out of the sort of the negative we're looking at right now, which is the fact that we've had a downtown that isn't working the way it is. On the way here with my wife, she says, I used to love going downtown, and I think we need to have a downtown like that. Now, unfortunately, the Board of Estimate are not legislators, so we need to help do things that encourage that and keep getting it going in that direction. I think my 16 years on the board, which includes 16 years on the park board, adds a lot, and I'm looking at the fact that I think I can add a lot to this board, and we can move ahead and prove that Minneapolis is the best city in America.
Thank you. Candidate Brandt?
I'd like to start by saying a little bit about what I admire about the two people who are up here with me. Bob, I bet you could probably still swim across Lake Harriet. And your 15 years as a coach amazes me. I lasted 7 years as a soccer coach. Eric, I admire your dedication to living to your principles, biking virtually everywhere in the city, and I admire the work that you do for a living and work to make this a better Minnesota. I am also an inveterate volunteer, as my wife, who's in the audience, will tell you. There are lots of times, lots of evenings when I'm not around. And I guess I would close by saying I've worked to make the board more accessible to the public. I've strengthened the Board of Estimate and Taxation as an institution compared to when I came in. We've balanced the needs of the city and the ability of people to pay. And we've pushed hard to explore alternative revenues so that we can find the kind of resource to see the kind of city that Eric is talking about envisioning.
Thank you.
And I share his vision.
Okay. Candidate Bernstein?
Well, I'll say also, yeah, it's been a joy to run for this office. I really appreciate both of these guys and getting to know them a little bit through this process, and it's been nice to run for an office that's a little bit less contentious. I'm troubled by the direction that our country is headed, and I'm troubled because I'm uncertain how our city will meet that challenge. But I do truly believe that Minneapolis has a unique potential to rise to the challenges that are ahead of us. We have a legacy of confident and effective policy making in this city and this state, and I think we can recapture that mantle and do new things that we need done, caring for people who are unsheltered, restoring sort of a sense of public safety and trust and social cohesion. And I think that the tax code has a lot to do with how we're going to get there. We have to be able to fund the things that we need and to continue to believe in our collective efficacy of working together and solving problems. And I think that we need a board that is united in that sort of a vision, and that we can have one, honestly, with probably any of the two of the three candidates here. I wouldn't have run for any other office. Some people say, oh, like, why the BET? And to me, it seems like the most obvious thing. Why? How could I not? How could you not want to be on the Board of Estimate and Taxation? But I do think it's been a real privilege to run and to share my vision for the city and to talk with so many voters. So this will probably be our last big public statements at a venue like this. So thank you all for your attention and for coming tonight.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, on behalf of the League of Women Voters, I thank the candidates for the Board of Estimate and Taxation for being part of this democratic process by running for office and for being willing to serve our community. We do hope that this forum will help you as voters make an informed decision. And let's show our appreciation one more time by some applause for our candidates. Now, I do have a few...
The League of Women Voters.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you. I have just a few final comments. Just as a reminder to remember, we use ranked choice voting for this election, where you vote for candidates in order of your preference, allowing you to rank your vote first choice, second choice, and third choice. This method can allow you to vote your vote to count toward a candidate if your favorite candidate loses. If your first choice is eliminated, your vote is moved to your second. To learn more about ranked choice voting, please visit our fair vote table outside or inside the room. We also thank you, the audience, for your participation in this forum and the democratic process. We challenge you to think about what you can do now to further the civic dialogue about the issues and get your friends and neighbors to participate in this important election. You can find nonpartisan information about candidates and about voting at another League website, vote411.org. And early voting for the general election began on Friday, September 19th, and will end on Monday, November 3rd. A video recording of this forum will be available unedited for viewing on the League of Women Voters website. Editing of this video is authorized only for official media reporting. Footage cannot be used in campaign publicity, and the recording is the property of the League of Women Voters Minneapolis. Please join us for an informal meet and greet with the candidates. Please vote. Your vote is your voice and your power. Thank you.